I'm here at the College Art Association annual meeting, 1 month after my last presentation at the American Institute of Archaeology and the Society for Classical Studies, where I presented my reverse engineering of the Doryphoros sculpture of the Canon of Polykleitos, the 5th century BCE original standards of proportions, and the first example of an art treatise by an artist, the actual birth of aesthetics from artists in Western histories. We had a chance to present our research last month in Philadelphia. Now, for the first time, I'm very excited to share with you an actual breakdown that you can follow along with, almost like a tutorial, so you can actually build your own canon of proportions on paper. So grab your compass and straight edge, and let's get to work reconstructing the Canon of Polykleitos.
Welcome to our session, Relearning to Learn New Methods for Art History. First up is Joshua, presenting his paper, Reintegrating the Canon, Classical Proportions, and Contemporary Pedagogical Strategies. Joshua is a monumental marble sculptor and a pioneering figure in online art education. He co-created the award-winning Villepue Academy with his mentor, Glenn Villepue, in 2010, and founded New Masters Academy in 2012, a visionary online art school that continues to set industry standards and influence online art education globally. Joshua is also an art teacher and advocate, specializing in drawing foundations, historical art practices, and their contemporary applications. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you. My name is Joshua Jacobo, a monumental marble sculptor and art educator. Last month at the annual joint conference of the Archaeological Institute of America and Society for Classical Studies, I presented our groundbreaking research on reconstructing the Canon of Polykleitos. This 5th century BCE treatise by Polycleitus of Argos, now lost to time, marked a significant milestone in art history, being the earliest known instance where a practicing artist systematically defined beauty and ideal proportions in human figures. Polykleitos' canon not only revolutionized sculpture with its methodical approach, but also introduced canon as a term denoting a standard of excellence. So the way we use the word canon today, canonical. The work has both initiated and influenced aesthetic principles among artists globally and established a framework impacting diverse academic fields. Our research reconnects this ancient theory with modern pedagogical practices, bridging millennia in the pursuit of ideal beauty, or if you prefer, control over the design of the figure. Today, I will demonstrate that the canon is fundamentally built on artistic outlines laid out on overlapping grids composed of modular units, finger widths, palms, and feet. This structure has sparked much speculation about its resemblance to earlier systems like those of the ancient Egyptians. We have discovered that Polykleitos integrated advanced Pythagorean mathematics, including irrational numbers, into these grids. While my previous paper detailed our reconstruction process, today's presentation contextualizes the canon within the broader traditions of figure proportions. For the first time, I will demonstrate its construction through sequential images meant to be reproduced using a straight edge and compass. We invite academics, artists, and educators to consider adopting these orthographic grid-based methods to enhance precision and efficiency in artistic practice. Due to time constraints today, I will focus on just one contemporary example, although numerous others exist. Many of you are familiar with this 20th century illustration by Andrew Loomis, whose diagrams are extensively used in art education today. His works, particularly those found in his books, have garnered many millions of views on YouTube. It is likely that this is the most influential diagram of human proportions in use by artists. Loomis's approach, which employs a 2-column grid, as you can see there, to define what he termed the normal figure at 7.5 heads tall, labels this proportion as rather dumpy. And you can see that on the far left. A judgment reflecting his personal aesthetic biases. This is further accentuated by his manipulation of hairstyle and facial hair, distorting traditional measurements of head height, which typically include the hair. So you can see the hair is actually full on some of these figures, and this figure here does not have much hair atop the head, so essentially he's sort of building a straw man in how he's presenting this. His interpretation presents a crude caricature of the proportional system developed by Dr. Paul Richet of the École des Beaux-Arts, an authority on academic and classical proportions. That's that 7.5 head. Moreover, anthropometric studies suggest that this dumpy so-called norm of 7.5 heads at the lowest end of his scale of acceptable human proportions. The heads get smaller and smaller relative to the body as we move from left to right. It's still more idealized than real human averages, which typically extend beyond 7 heads, depending on demographic factors. Interestingly, these natural anthropometric averages align more closely with the canon, of Polycleitos than with Loomis's descriptions. Loomis also covers female proportions, notably adding high heels into his diagrams, while his male figures, such as his Greek-inspired discus thrower on the right, are exaggerated to an astonishing 9 heads tall, significantly distorting the classical ideals he's emulating. As a commercial illustrator and author, Loomis's methods are heavily influenced by his industrial and personal aesthetic preferences. This raises serious questions about the authenticity and practicality of his teachings in educational settings, where a more universal, historically informed, precise, and nuanced approach would better benefit students. Given the oversimplified nature of Loomis's work, New Masters Academy chooses not to teach or endorse his methods. It is imperative that we critically assess the sources of our educational content. We must discern how much of our instruction on human proportions is grounded in thorough, sound, well understood, and rigorously applied knowledge of art and nature, and how much is altered to suit momentary aesthetic or commercial preferences. As such, we as educators are dutifully bound to adapt the ancient art of proportions and symmetry to better serve the diverse and demanding needs of today's artists. These considerations fuel our ongoing research on the canon, compelling us to investigate not only the origin of Loomis's ideas about proportions, but also the sources from which his instructors and their instructors derived their knowledge. Throughout history, the quest to capture human proportions in art has been guided by seminal works, notably those of Renaissance masters Leonardo da Vinci and Albrecht Dürer. Their studies, profoundly influenced by the treatise of Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, a 1st century AD Roman architect and military engineer, mark a pivotal resurgence of classical ideals in art. Leonardo's iconic Vitruvian Man drawing, there on the left, embodies a synthesis of Vitruvian prescriptions and Renaissance innovation, symbolizing the harmonious blend of art, science, and philosophy that characterizes this era. This drawing, perhaps the most recognized globally, serves not only as a testament to Leonardo's ability, but also as a cornerstone in the evolution of figure art. The tradition of creating drawing manuals, initiated in 1607 with Odoardo Fioletti's inaugural guide, has persisted through the centuries. This lineage boasts illustrious contributors such as Jean Cusson, Gerard de Laresse, Godfried Shadow, Paul Richet, Godfried Baumis, and Glenn Villepeu. Each has uniquely enriched the body of knowledge that contemporary artists rely on to understand the complexities of the human form. The Renaissance's intense engagement with proportions was an earnest emulation of antiquity, striving to reach the philosophical and sculptural ideals of the Greeks as originally codified by Polycleitus in his lost canon. This involved meticulous measurements of antique sculptures and the study of ancient writings such as those by Vitruvius, who were then newly translated into common languages like the commonly spoke Italian and German. This fervor for understanding classical proportions has profoundly influenced today's art instruction and continues to underpin our comprehension of figure art through both studio teachings and published manuals. While the contributions of Vitruvius are foundational to our understanding of classical art, his works primarily offer a retrospective view of Greek sculpture composed centuries after its revered classical period. His insights, although invaluable, are eclipsed by the significance of Polykleitos' lost canon, a seminal treatise on human proportions that defined classical sculptural aesthetics. And you can see an example of that here with the Doryphoros. Our findings, recently presented at the annual conference, showcase a process of collaboration with museums and the deployment of advanced 3D scanning technology on ancient copies and plaster casts of copies of Polykleitos' Doryphoros, the spear bearer, which is the sculpture that you see here. This statue, as cited by ancient scholars, visually illustrates the lost contents of the canon. Our project involved orthographic analyses of these scans to deduce the sculpture's underlying design principles, comparing them with other historical artworks and textual descriptions across a chronological spectrum. So basically, we are working with scans and doing our own scans, and then once we've got the 3D information, we are able to take measurements that are orthographic. So in a sculpture, I'm a marble sculptor, we draw on the face of the block and then we carve into it. Well, when we carve into the block, we destroy that drawing because it's in the way of the sculpture. So it's actually quite difficult to reverse engineer a proportional system when all of that stone has already been removed. And even if there was evidence of lines at some point, it's long gone. So that's why we sort of had to go to more extraordinary lengths to be able to analyze it. So our explorations extend to examining ancient Egyptian art where square grids, integral to design processes, were employed from the Old Kingdom through the Middle and Late Kingdoms. During a recent research expedition to Egypt, I documented how these grids underpin the creation of everything from hieroglyphics to monumental decorations, providing a structured framework that predates the actual artistic execution. Ancient artists utilized mathematical grids, or in this case of the ancient Egyptians, square grids, to organize their artistic intentions. In Egyptian art, these grids were more than tools transferring or enlarging existing designs, as commonly practiced today, but were foundational to the initial stages of artistic creation. The process is evident in artifacts and architectural elements from various periods where the precision of grid-based design facilitated complex artistic expressions. The artistic methodologies involved sketching preliminary designs on materials like clay tablets or recycled fragments called ostraca, papyrus, or in the example here, this is actually on a wood panel. This approach was pivotal for both two-dimensional and three-dimensional art forms. So this isn't just for drawing or for painting. In mural painting, for example, artists initially sketched outlines in red paint, subsequently refining these designs in black before the application of color. As successive layers were added, the underlying grid lines became obscured, yet they were essential for the accuracy of the composition. This method was mirrored in relief sculpture, where the initial grid acted as a fundamental guideline for each curve and contour of the design. So I'm not just talking about the vertical and horizontal lines you can see. Look at the top left example there. Every single curve that chains together to form those outlines, that is the design, and it is connected to the grid. The grid is not just used to like enlarge or move it. The grid is actually part of the design. It's the part of the design that gets hidden. So similarly, sculptures in the round started with grids and outlines marked on block forms from which artists sculpted, viewing the cardinal directions before rounding off the material to finalize the sculpture's final form. And these are the best examples I've seen of this. Here we've got a prism, we've got a block, and you've got a grid drawn on this block or incised on this block with a chisel. And then up above on the top right, you can see three statuettes that may have been a training example where you can actually see how this process plays out. It's outlines drawn on the faces of the block, and then all of the material from each view is removed around those outlines, which are built on the grid, and then there's a final rounding off. And that's still how a lot of traditional sculpture is done today, actually. Unfinished statuettes and workshop models stand as tangible evidence of these methods, likely serving dual roles as educational aids and quality control benchmarks within ancient artistic workshops or communities. Our research into the Polycleitus' use of the canon reveals adaptations in grid techniques distinct from other contemporary practices. For instance, unlike the typical single grid approach, which might extend 19, 20, or 21 squares in height, you can actually see an Old Kingdom example of an image that I took there. On the left-hand side, you can see the really direct evidence of those grids. The Doryphoros incorporates multiple overlapping grids, each with unique properties that align with various anthropometric points on the body. I will now guide you step by step through a hypothetical construction of this system, demonstrating one potential method of realization. Teaching my students, I have always maintained that the best way to comprehend any architectural or sculptural construction is to draw it yourself. To assist in this, the upcoming slides are designed for drawing using a compass and straight edge. As a way of showing you this, I've prepared these like a tutorial, like a line-by-line breakdown to help you understand this system, because it's a little easier to do it this way. So step one is drawing a vertical line. The initial vertical line represents the total standing height of the figure from the soles of the feet to the top of the hair, or the vertex of the sculpture, also known as a crown. So you can start this vertical line at any size. The whole idea of proportional systems is that they don't have to have it doesn't have to be 6 inches tall or 20 centimeters tall. It can be any distance. We just start with one line that we define as our vertical. Next, we find the midpoint of the line using a perpendicular bisector. So if you remember your middle school geometry, hopefully, vaguely, using a compass, you can create a right angle and find the midpoint. That's a very common technique. We're going to draw a circle with the midpoint as the center that passes through the vertical endpoints. So essentially, we're creating a symmetrical cross within a circle, essentially, a vertical and a horizontal. We can draw the diameter there for the horizontal. So now we've got a cross in a circle. It's very Vitruvian. We then bisect the 4 angles. So we've got 4 90-degree angles on the internal angles of that cross. And we're trying to make a square, but we want the square rotated upright. And so we can bisect the angles using the typical angle bisection technique in geometry that gives us the corners of our square. And so now we have a square with a circle inscribed within it and a cross. And you could do this anyway. You could do this with dimensions. You can make it 10 inches by 10 inches and then and then exit out, find the center, set your compass to 5 inches. You could also do this with units, but it's not necessary. So we've got a circle, we've got a cross, and we've got a square. Now we're going to bisect both halves of the square side to create 4 divisions. So I'm just splitting the top half and the lower half into 4 using just common geometrical techniques. So now we have 4 rows here. That's also as Vitruvius describes. So now, what have we actually established so far? Well, if you look at this orthographic rendering of the scan data of the SMK copy of the Naples Doryphoros, you can actually see here that these quarter divisions from the top of the sculpture to the bottom of the feet gives us the armpits, which are very important for torsos, the pubic symphysis at the halfway point of the body, also known as the root of the genitals. That's what Vitruvius calls it. Also the knees at the tibial plateau, the same place that Leonardo uses it, and then the soles of the feet. So this is what we have so far. Now we want to take these 4 rows and turn them into 8. So we're just going to bisect each row, just the way that most proportional systems do. We get to 8 rows. And so we're going to bisect with the compass to come up with 8 rows. Now, these eighths of the height are actually important for establishing the upper limb. So with the arm at its side, you see we have A, B, C. We have these different measures here. So we have the armpits. Getting these eighths allow us to actually move down to the elbows, which are at C, and it's actually the medial epicondyle that it seems like they're actually using on the inside of the arm. The wrists at B, and the extended fingertips. So the length of the fingers, if the fingers were to be extended, appears to be A, which is actually 1/10 of the human height, which is something that Vitruvius and other artists still use today. So it looks like the hand really is 1/10. So those eighths help get the upper limb. So one of the challenges here was the head height, because head height is often what the entire grid is based on. Like if you looked at that Loomis diagram, it's often a head height system. Is it 7.5 heads? Is it 8 heads? Loomis takes it to this really insane 9 heads. Most people are 7 heads or larger. But how tall is the head of the Doryphoros? Well, we measured this distance. You can see it wasn't 1/8. It actually wasn't quite even 1/7, which is what most descriptions put it at. So we actually tried a Vitruvian-inspired construction here. Within this square and circle, we inscribed another square. And so what that actually does is that second square within the circle, the diagonal of that square is the diameter of the circle. And so the Pythagorean theorem, you probably remember this from middle school, where you learned that the Pythagorean theorem utilizes the square root of 2. So this construction, while really simple, I'll show you how to do it right now. This construction actually gives you a space between the top square and the lower square that's very Vitruvian in construction, and that is actually an irrational number. So this is not 1/8, 1/7. It's an irrational number, which would have been, a lot of scholars have suggested that there probably is a Pythagorean element to it. So this actually predicts scholarly work on it and actually answers the question of how Pythagorean mathematics might have been utilized. So the actual space between the top of the head and the bottom of the chin, and if you notice here, the inflection between the gastrocnemius and the soleus on the inside, outside, and rear sides are also given by the bottom square here. So just one square in that circle gives us an irrational number, which is very difficult to express numerically or arithmetically, but as you'll see right now, it's quite easy to draw. So we can do a lot of things in drawing that are not easy to do with numbers. So how do we get our inner square? Well, we just connect the opposing corners of the square with diagonal lines, and then where it touches the circle, that's where we get our inner square. And that's why I use this at the beginning of the talk. You notice almost like that little symbol right there, that appears to be the construction that gives you the head of the Doryphoros, and that's the first time this has been suggested. So that was actually a really fascinating connection that we found. So we're just darkening that inner square so you can see it here, and it's sort of a recap. I've sort of cleaned up the construction so you can appreciate where we are so far. So far we've got 2 grids. We've got a sort of a normal 8-row grid built on a square. That's very typical. The square within the circle is very unusual, but it explains the size of the head. Now we actually need to get the facial height. So this is the 3rd layer here. So Vitruvius says the facial height is going to be 1/10 of the total height of the body, and we measured it, and as you can see there in this orthographic illustration, it looks to be exactly 1/10 of the height. So now that we have that upper edge of that smaller square, we can put 1/10 of the height oriented at the bottom of the chin there, and it properly places the face exactly and gives us the correct measurement. So to do this, I'm just taking, so I need 1/10 of the height. So I'm just taking 1/2 of one of the sides, and I'm breaking it into 5. So I'm taking 1/5 of a half, that's the same as 1/10, and then we just move it up. We just take our compass, we just put that 1/10 right there. So this is the third layer of the grid here. It's in a slightly bluer color. It's not showing up great on this display. And that gives us the correct position of the face at 1/10. So this is where things really got interesting, because to help reverse engineer this, we actually started with ancient Egyptian grids and then worked our way forwards chronologically. And in ancient Egyptian art, and I know somebody in the audience actually knows this, in ancient Egyptian grids, it's not the top of the head that seems to be used to align with their grids, it's the hairline. That might have been because they had elaborate headwear and you couldn't always see the top of the cranium or the top of the hair in Egyptian art, but the hairline was actually used. And so we actually gave that a shot. We tried that with the Doryphoros. So we took the hairline to the bottom of the feet, just like in ancient Egyptian grids, which I'll show, and then we tried splitting it into 3, which is what the ancient Egyptians were doing. Didn't have a match, but when we split it into 4, we got the nipples, people. That's actually important. We need to get the nipples. So it gave us the nipples, and then, as well as the nipples, if we split the second fourth from the top in half, it gives us the navel. So we got the exact nipples, the exact navel, and then we also have the facial height, the hand length, the head height, the knee. We're really narrowing it down here, and the pubic symphysis as well. So that's how we get the navel. We just split that middle row of this hairline to soles of the feet. And then this is probably familiar to any artists here who have spent time working on the face. If we, just like Vitruvius prescribes, if we take the face and divide it into 3, so we basically get the hairline, hopefully, to the top of the nose or the brow. You get the nose, just like Leonardo writes about, and then you get the bottom part of the face. Nose to chin, hairline to nose, hairline to brows, those classic facial thirds that most artists have heard of, they're alive and well. They seem to be oriented very clearly in the Doryphoros as well. So we just split that face into 3, and that gives us our facial thirds. And if we go to the bottom and we split the lowest eighth, so that initial grid where we just divide it into 8 rows, if we split that into 3, we actually get the exact top of the foot that is, there's one foot that's just resting flat, and then one foot that's back, and he's up on the ball of the foot. The foot that's flat goes right at 2/3, the 2-3 mark, and the foot that's upraised goes exactly at the 1-2 mark. So both parts of the pose, the dynamic and the relaxed, which is a big part of the isonomia, the rhythmos, so the actual composition, it seems like both sides actually align with the grid at different levels. It wasn't a part-by-part breakdown. And so this is one slide from my last talk I just wanted to share, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. And so you can see, although the grids were not transferred to the final stone perfectly, they used like strings that they would dip into red paint, and they would snap it the way a contractor will snap a chalk line. So there is some drift, but you can see with these reconstructions that I've done, and on the left, that's an Old Kingdom grid. According to a lot of the literature, there's not supposed to be Old Kingdom grids, but I found several strong examples of this, and I'm sure there's work out there on this. This is not my specialty, but these are my constructions. On the left, it's Saqqara, and you can actually see pretty clearly that we've got a unit of the foot, which is at 3 squares, and we haven't moved things to make it work. You could actually see, but if you get up here and measure and offset it a little bit onto the grid, it's 3 squares pretty consistently. And the palm, which is horizontal, you see that on the right, we've got one palm that's facing down, that's 1 square. And sometimes the palm can be 1 square angled, but the sort of palm at the side is that 1 square. And so this is the ancient Egyptian context from which the ancient Greek art was building. So this was sort of the first big breakthrough that allowed everything to fall into place. We noticed, and as far as I know, no one else has noticed this, but you can see it really clearly when I illustrate it like this for you, but we noticed that the palm width, which according to ancient Egyptian metrology, so that's actually, if you look at the bottom left, that's an actual ancient Egyptian measuring rod. And so if you look at the middle row, you see it has 1 little dash, 2 dashes. Those are finger widths. So this is 1 finger width, 2, 3, and 4 is represented as a palm. So that's a palm. Well, apparently the Greeks were still thinking like Egyptians, because you can see it right here. B is 1/24. So when we took that eighth and we split it into 3, that gives you exactly B. B fits into C exactly 3 times. And A, so 4 fingers build that palm. There is a 1 finger offset between the foot to the palm, which is oriented horizontally. So this is supposedly a didactic sculpture, right? This is supposed to be a sculpture that teaches proportions and allows other artists to grab the artistic outlines off of it, right? Well, you can see from the positioning, which is not a natural, normal situation in a sculpture, it's being presented to show these units. So we actually believe that the finger width is the base module that's been theorized about. It's the finger width. A fits into B 4 times, B fits into C 3 times exactly, and then there's a 1 finger offset just to make it really clear. We don't have the written canon, but we're just reverse engineering the copies that are remaining. So a lot of people have had a lot of fancy theories on the Doryphoros over the years, and the tough question that nobody wants to answer is, where's the table? Like, show me the table. You say you figured it out. Well, here's your table. We have a total height of 1 cubits. So the cubit is the distance from the outstretched fingers to the elbow. It was a measure that they would use. 4 cubits makes up the height of the body, just like Vitruvius. Now, I have cranium at 8, and that is because if you use the eyes as the center line, which is typically the case in ancient art, if we measure from the bottom of the chin to the eyes and we were to double it, well, we can't see into his hairstyle, right, because it's stone. But in some sculptures, like the Riace warriors, you can actually see through the cast hair to the cranium inside. And so in the original Greek bronzes, you would often have an actual casting of the head, and then they would cast the hair over it in situ, in position. So the original bronze may have had a head that is 1/8, because if you double the distance between the chin and the eye level, it's very theoretical that it's theoretically plausible that it is a 1/8 head if we're excluding the hair. Now, typically you don't exclude the hair, you include the hair. If we're including the hair, it's closer to 1/7, but it's really this insane irrational number with decimals that go on forever. I can't put the head height in the table because it's an irrational number. That's the square in the circle. Very clever if you think about it, because they're actually using simple ratios. There's a simple table and a simple prescriptions, but then there's a few key things. The head seems important, where you have an irrational number that would have been the subject of fascination for Polycleitus, because it was the subject of fascination for the ancient Greeks based on the textual evidence. So 8 craniums, so the depth of the foot, I already showed this, is 1/6, so it's a 6-foot figure. It's exactly 6 feet tall. Now, the foot of it's actually 7 feet tall in reality. I'm talking about the proportionally 6 feet, not the imperial unit. So that the palm is 18, the finger is 72, so the figure is 72 finger widths tall. Face and the hand are 1/10. The forehead, the nose, lower face are 1/30, because we're just dividing that 10 in half. But here are the numbers. Hopefully there's no mistakes. I checked this many times, but I'm not a mathematician, I'm a sculptor. So hopefully I haven't made any mistakes here, but we're really hoping that this can actually serve as a jumping off point for future explorations. I would love to get access to better scans of the Doryphoros copies. Maybe I can use this to leverage a better situation with the museums, and they'd let me, because there were scans that the museums provided, but they were often from third-party contractors, and the scans were too low resolution. And so we actually use scanning technology as part of our marble workshop. So what I'm hoping to do is actually travel to these museums and do high resolution scans to build this. So I hope you've appreciated the power and fascination of this type of construction. For me, the inventiveness, elegance, and practicality of this approach have not only enriched my professional work, but also sharpened my understanding of historical art. Adopting Polykleitos' mindset in designing figures or any artistic subject matter can lead to a significant transformation in both the process and quality of results achievable by today's artists. So you don't have to use the proportions of the Doryphoros, but understanding how grids can be overlapped as part of the design process could be taught to students to create any kind of character in any kind of situation. It just helps us understand what proportions actually are, instead of what we're mostly doing, which is a sort of Renaissance-inspired repeating of prescriptions without fully understanding these systems. So as we explore these ancient methodologies, let us reflect on the profound implications of contemporary arts and education. Integrating these time-tested techniques into modern pedagogical strategies not only deepens our understanding of art, but also ensures that our educational practices are both historically grounded and highly relevant to the diverse needs of today's artists. As I continue to develop this research, I look forward to offering more insights and enriching the academic community. Thank you. I didn't get that. Well, in the case of, some of the scans were provided, and there's different technologies they use to scan. In the case of the Naples Doryphoros scan, we did it using photogrammetry. So you take a camera and you essentially orbit the object, taking hundreds of photographs. And then there's an algorithm that uses something called Brown's distortion model. The technology has existed since like World War II. It's one of the ways, it's basically just triangulation. So every triangle of the mesh has 3 vertices. And those vertices are identified as points in the photos and there's like hundreds of thousands of these points. So imagine like there's a freckle on my forehead and you take lots of pictures. Well, the software is able to find that freckle in every photo, relate it to these other freckles, and it's able to build meshes that have a really, really good resolution. But in this particular case, that was the only one we did. So we actually, the Uffizi gave us a scan. Generally speaking, the scans are not the best quality. I think this is sort of like across the board. Like you typically don't get like the highest quality scanners. That like if you wanted the best quality results, the equipment's in the hundreds of thousands. Photogrammetry can be done by anybody with a DSLR, but there's like a knowledge barrier where you don't always get great results. And so, at least for the work that we're doing, like we did the best we can getting what we could. But it would be really great if I had access to higher resolution scans. I could do comparative analyses. I could register them on top of one another. But something like that has actually been done. I think by the Getty, there was a Chinese collaboration where they were looking at copies of just the face of the Doryphoros, and they were comparing them to one another, and found that they were highly, highly accurately reproduced. So Roman copies, obviously, they could be of different quality, but it seems like they understood, or my interpretation is that they knew that this was the canon, and it was important to get it right. That being said, there's been questions about like the MIA's copy of the Doryphoros. There's been some questions about like which ones are a good example of it and which aren't. But yeah, I would love to get the opportunity to go deeper on that. So we just went with the best scan data we have of the Naples Doryphoros, which seems to be the most well-preserved and the best copy, which is at the Naples Archaeological Museum. Did I answer your question or did I miss it? Well, that's why it had to be scans, because there has been like scholarly work published where in ancient Egyptian or Greek art where they use photographs and then they overlay a grid on the photograph. That doesn't actually work because every camera has an inherent lens distortion, and so you would have to have like a really long telephoto lens and be really far away, and you still can't. So you can't actually create an orthographic photo. Like that's actually not possible, and that's why you had all these like nets and windows to draw on, like the actual optics of it. But the nice thing about a 3D scan is that those point positions exist in a Cartesian space, and then in the computer, we can create an orthographic render just by changing the setting in the software. But that would be like, I don't know if it's actually impossible optically, because I have seen there are some like supposedly orthographic cameras that are for scientific purposes, but it's only like a screw. You wouldn't be able to get the whole, and also if you were not willing to move the sculpture out of the museum, right, if they don't want to take the risk of moving it, like there's no way you couldn't, there's not enough physical space in the room where these sculptures are housed to get a camera far away. So I think this is part of the problem, trying to analyze sculptures from photographs and from documentation. Like the grids would never line up. You would actually have to reconstruct a 3D environment to scale, create a plane that represents a grid and then a plane behind, and then you would have to somehow, like this is practical marble sculpting problems that we have. Like we deal with it constantly. Like for example, like you could hang a string down to help you as like a plumb line, hang another string down, but you'd have to mark the exact height and get your eye exactly such that these 2 points on these 2 strings line up. Only from that exact view would one small area look accurate. So the computer just allows us to just go into orthographic, like we remove all lens distortions altogether, and we're in a purely Cartesian space, which is really useful for this kind of work. And I don't know if other orthographic style work like this has been done, but you could apply this to, it doesn't have to be the canon, this could be applied to any sculpture using, if we think that the methods maybe, if we think that it was essentially a drawing that got projected in, which we're assuming was the case here. In future research, I would like to break down both sides separately, because I was only reading off sort of the neutral side, because there's a more neutral side than there's a relaxed side. I mentioned a couple times, it appears that they both are lining up with the grids. Like they're actually both, so that, for example, the feet, So the foot that's planted, the weight-bearing foot, the one that's seen sort of side on, the right foot, that weight-bearing foot is seen in a very Egyptian planar style, and the other one is back. So you might assume that, like in neoclassical art or in really contemporary sculpture, maybe we get the feet looking right, and then we sort of pose it, and then what are the rules for that posing? But I actually suspect that the whole thing's on this grid. So just like in ancient Egyptian sculpture, and the reason why that is because like this is actually interesting with the contrapposto, but the shoulders are being offset, the pelvis is being offset, and then the wrist is right where it's supposed to be. It's almost like we need the wrist to be here, maybe because it's didactic, but we want the wrist to be here because this is where the wrist is supposed to go, and then this is a little tilting game, but we're still keeping the wrist where it's supposed to be. It's hard to tell if that had something to do with like the teaching aspects of it, as opposed to, it'd be interesting to compare it to like the Diadoumenos and other sculptures. But to me, it does appear, there was enough connections I saw. I think the whole thing's on a grid, both sides, and that a more complete version would be, okay, here's where the loose knee, here's where the weight-bearing knee is, here's where this elbow is, there's where that. I think they're lining up in the grid, but I do suspect that when you get into Hellenistic art where things are really getting dynamic, it's starting to feel like, Baroque European art where it has those movements. It might be that the head is built on a grid of finger lengths, like that foot I showed, but maybe these are getting posed out of the grid at some point. I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious, though. Yeah. I gave a little talk for my students at I think it was at the Albertina Museum, and I was looking at some of those ancient Egyptian examples where it's pretty clearly the whole thing is designed from the side view, and they're just like projecting in, and they're projecting this way as well. Well, I think at some point, I think there's a handoff between the entire sculpture is one gridded unit, and the individual pieces are gridded, and we're moving those pieces. And how much of the entire pose is on the grid, but then if we were to zoom in on the hand and it's turned at this weird angle, we would find the grid of the hand as well. And I think this is going to tie into the history of chloroplasty, because in addition to the amazing, carvings and stuff that we see from the ancient world, the ancient Greeks in particular were excellent clay modelers, and that's even discussed about in the context of the Doryphoros with having the clay under the nail and what this means. But it could be like let's say, for example, as a modeler, I could draw a grid of the head. I could build half of the head on my little panel, then I could build the other half. So I could build a head that's based on a grid. I could stick it on a model where the whole pose is on a grid, but I could also just start turning things and just allow these transformations, more like in a Michelangelo-esque sort of a way, or George Bridgman, just start turning these pieces. But I think that's a really good question, because that's really fascinating. At what point is it the entire piece is on one prism grid versus the individual parts? But I did do some analysis. I didn't really talk about it this one on the foot, the hand, and the head, and it does appear plausible to me that the individual parts are on the finger unit. So it may already be that, where that foot is back, and then there's certain points where they're hitting on the big grid, but then also if we were to get down there and start looking at the toes from the top view, we're going to find that it's like claymation or something. We have a standard foot, and then we're sort of posing it, and then it's still fitting on the grid. But I think this is a really fascinating area to explore, because that seems like there's a whole other aspect to the story of, the story is like everything was rigid, and then we got cool about it, and everything got all I mean, that's kind of basic the way that I think we tend to frame the development from ancient Egyptian art into these full contrapposto scenes. Maybe thinking of like at what level are the grids being applied, and at what level is the drawing in space being applied. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to bogart this. That's really fascinating. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to do more work though. So I'm here in front of the unbelievable Roman copy of the Diadoumenos, which is a work of Polycleitus, which is the exact system that I've been reverse engineering and touring around the country, and hopefully soon out of the country to teach. You can just see how gorgeous these proportions are in practice, which we can see here is 1/6 of the total height. The palm, which isn't pictured here, the measurement across the palm is actually 1/3 of the depth of the foot, and it's 4 finger widths, just as in ancient Egyptian metrology. And the face is 1/10 of the total height, and so is the length of the palm. Halfway point is the pubic symphysis here. Cranium without the hair excluded is most likely 1/8. And here we have another Diadoumenos. The work of Polycleitus was copied very widely and quite faithfully. At least that is the belief based on analyses of the different sculptures, particularly analyses of the faces conducted by the Getty. This is associated with Polycleitus as well. It's really the same face, whether it's an Amazonian woman or it is a athlete, spear bearer. The facial part is the same. What makes it male or female in the Greek context is actually the neck, the hairstyle, not the face itself. Well, I hope you found that as fascinating as I have. Obviously, this is just scratching the surface of these kinds of reconstructions. We'd really like to encourage artists out there, art scholars, anybody in a position to come up with some grant money, please let us know. I would love to explore this further. If you're an artist and you're using this at home or you're exploring this as the basis for your own reconstructions, I highly recommend that you consider integrating grids into your process. You can construct the grid just like I showed. You can start by looking at the images I showed and maybe try drawing the Doryphoros itself, and then make some tweaks. You want the head smaller, you want the hands larger. Modifying an existing system is much easier than reinventing the wheel for your own designs. So what I'd really love to see is artists experimenting with these techniques. There's pre-copyright books like Godfrey's Shadow that might be a really good jumping off point. But we want you to use these grids and share your work with us. You can join us at the New Masters Academy community. That's discord.gg/NMA. Join us at New Masters Academy. That's nma.art, not .com, nma.art, and join the conversation. I'm really excited to see what you can do with this information. Thank you so much for joining me.